Water brought most of our ancestors to this continent. And water took them westward into it. Water was their road to freedom and sometimes riches, their source of inspiration and adventure. That's also true on the driftwood for a group of young people right out of college. With video cameras, they embarked on a 25,000-mile voyage, gathering stories along the way. Their adventure took 3 years and covered the eastern part of North America from Nova Scotia to the Gulf of Mexico. They wanted to find out how the waterways influence our lives, and in turn, what we have done to the water. Travel with them to visit the places and meet the people they discovered along the way. Like a small woman who has the big job of moving barges from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi. A rough river captain who is assembling his own navy on the Kentucky shore. And a return to the past where the old South is relived on a glorious day. Like so many others, these people are tied heart and soul to the legendary waterway that cuts across the heart of America. The big, blue-collar river of the working class, the beautiful Ohio.
Oh, beautiful Ohio, in dreams again I see visions of what used to be.
There's a story behind this story. It all began as an idea shared by a father and a son. But the son, an award-winning filmmaker, died in an auto accident. His father decided to go ahead with the project as a kind of memorial. He bought a 60-foot motor yacht, named it Driftwood, and outfitted it with television equipment. He hired a professional crew to run the boat. Then he selected teams of Canadian and U.S. college graduates, young people who, like his son, wanted to share their discoveries with others. They signed on for about a month each. They got room and board, a salary, and a chance to help document what they saw on the waters. Bill Arnold from Canada's Mohawk College was one of the first selected. He became a permanent member of the Driftwood video crew.
We're doing a documentary, but we aren't out to sensationalize the stories. We're documenting actual life along the river.
For this journey, Bill was assisted by Mark Hollensteiner from Ohio University.
Originally, I thought it would be more, I'd be on a boat, not a boat like the Driftwood. I thought it'd be much smaller, and basically just shooting scenery and maybe once in a while getting off and talking maybe to local marina people or something like that.
The group assembled at the genesis of the Ohio River, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Golden Triangle, where two rivers meet to form a third. The Allegheny feeds in from the north, and the Monongahela comes up from the south. They joined to push the Ohio westward, gravity taking the rain and snow from high to low. Pittsburgh is the eastern hub of commerce for the Ohio. From here, the river can take anything that floats and send it west. That usually means huge barges pushed by towboats.
National Marine, this is Sheila.
A woman named Sheila Johnson is an expert on that.
If you ever met her and walked into the office, you wouldn't realize what she's really doing. She is controlling and dispatching barges that are traveling from Pittsburgh all the way down to New Orleans.
Like many occupations on the river, this was considered men's work. But Sheila asked for the job, got it, and then learned it.
Okay, well, I appreciate the shift on the 2487, and I'm not in any rush on 123, but it's early yet. Phone hasn't started ringing right. Okay? Bye-bye.
Sheila works with a computer, but she also keeps her own handwritten records. She's a river person. She knows that even if the computer goes down, the water keeps rolling and the barges must keep moving. At any one time, Sheila knows the location of hundreds of barges and tells them where to go and when. It's not like the old days when salty dispatchers ran things by the seat of their pants. But most things have changed since then.
Bye-bye.
The Pittsburgh where Sheila grew up was far different than it is today. She remembers steel mills belching smoke and fire, a constant hazy overcast, and air so dirty that washed clothes had to be hung inside to dry. It seemed that everyone she knew worked at the mills. It was hard work, but the money was good. The pollution was gradually cleared up, but not without changes. Some of the mills were so old they needed to be rebuilt to comply with the new clean air standards. Instead, many either closed or located elsewhere. That happened in the Homestead area of Pittsburgh. A lot of jobs were lost. Was it worth it?
I'm not real sure. I'm not real sure. If I lived in Homestead, I'd say no. If my husband worked in a mill, I'd say no.
But the new Pittsburgh was a surprise to Bill Arnold.
I'd never been to Pittsburgh before, and from what I had reading and a few of the photographs, I was expecting the worst, and I was just absolutely amazed at how beautiful the city really is.
The Native Americans, the Indians, recognized the beauty of this great valley. In fact, they gave the river its name. Their word, Ohio, means bright, shining, great, beautiful. Throughout most of history, the river was navigable only certain times of the year. Traffic stopped in periods of drought and flood. A series of locks and dams control that now. The first the driftwood encountered was at Emsworth, 7.5 miles from Pittsburgh. It was there they began to understand the value of the Ohio to the nation. Some 200 million tons of cargo a year sent 981 miles from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi at Cairo, Illinois. This is where they found Sharon Crane Donahue, married to a policeman and mother of an infant son. She is another woman who has a job once handled by men. Sharon is a lock operator. The work is hard, with no margin for error. She's responsible for each boat's entry and eventual departure.
End of the day, I'm tired. I'm physically tired. I took a pedometer into work one time, and just actually locking boats on an average day, I figured out that I walk about 8 miles a day. 4 back to 5, that's a riser.
A few years ago, she was a successful account manager for a major soup company. White-collar work, clean clothes, a lot of travel. Then the river called, a call that some people just cannot ignore.
The river just always had a lure and a fascination for me. And I said, Sharon, you only go around in life once. And if the boys can do it, why can't I do it?
Sharon works with a man named Melvin Rippey.
She's a hard worker, and she's not afraid to get her hands dirty, and she works right along with the men. Hasn't been a problem so far.
Sharon has heard some other rivermen complain that by doing this job, she's taking food away from another man's table. She figures that her table is just as important.
I have to eat. I mean, you know, I have a car the same as a guy does. I have gas bill, electric bills, house bills. You know, what difference does it make? I'm a person. But they've gotten over it.
There are river families all up and down the Ohio. This is Sharon's. Actually, it's an extended family. River people coming together to eat, laugh, tell stories.
Here, baby, come on.
Hey, Corey. That's you doing, buddy.
This gathering was held to help a tow captain build an extension to his house.
Clyde, he follows us around and gets all the food.
Naturally, Skip Crane was there.
Because they drop more.
He's Sharon's cousin, but they refer to each other as brother and sister. That's because Sharon's mother raised them both. Skip runs a barge maintenance business that also does some marine salvage. Sharon really wanted to work for him, but he turned her down.
She wanted to work on the boats.
And she wanted to be a deckhand, a pilot, and the family was kind of didn't want that to have a girl there, so we kind of helped her get a job on a lock, figuring that would be a little better, and she took to it, and so it satisfied everybody. She wants to work. She wanted to be a pilot, especially after I hired a woman pilot.
That turned out to be one of Sharon's favorite river people, Cindy Grimes. Cindy is a divorced mother of 2 daughters. She enjoys spending time with her girls, like in the park in their town, Beaver, Pennsylvania. Cindy is one of the very few female boat captains on the Ohio. But this is not a romantic story of a young woman answering the river's call. Cindy is a survivor, trying to make something out of a life that fortune has not exactly smiled upon. Both her mother and her ex-husband had trouble with alcohol. She left school after the 10th grade. She's been on welfare. In her wilder youth, she almost bit the finger off a policeman. She was a teenage mother when the state offered to give her training as a welder.
She came in there, she was a little girl 5 foot high, and I told her, I said, little girl, you can't do this work. This is, big tears start coming to her eyes, and I said, oh man, you know. So I told her, I'll give you a shot, but if you can't do it, you gotta go.
When I first started here, it was lousy. When you're in welding school, they let you clean everything. Your metal's all real nice and neat and real clean. You come down here and you weld on these dirty barges, and I mean, they're all rusty, and then some of them are so thin that if you just barely touch them the wrong way, you'll burn a hole through them. And I had a rough time.
She's a welder, good welder, and then I started her out decking. I made her deck for 3 years. Then I put her in the pilot house and gave her a try. She's a good pilot. Now she has her pilot's license. She's captain on one of my boats. Does a real fine job.
When she started piloting a tug, Cindy had to stand on a box to see where she was going. And like Sharon Crane Donahue, she had to gain the respect of the hard men who worked the river.
Most of the other guys I have no problems with. You know, every once in a while you'll find 1 or 2 that thinks you should be home raising kids and cooking dinner, but you know, really, it's not bad at all. I have lots of help from all the guys out there. If I need a hand, I always have to say, hey guys, I need help. And they're there.
She was like some of the other people I think we met. I mean, they didn't try to hide anything. And they told you just the way it was. I mean, we asked her a question, she would tell us.
I used to work with them up at 6.
River people seem to have a strange gift for accepting the cards they are dealt. Sharon Crane Donahue wanted to be a boat captain. Her cousin, Skip Crane, refused her and then helped Cindy Grimes become a captain. Shouldn't that make Sharon angry?
I'm like Cindy's biggest cheerleader, and I think that's great.
The toughest thing for Cindy now is the long periods of time she is away from her daughters.
I hate that. That's the worst thing, is to tell the girls, hey, I gotta go on the boat. So the easiest way to tell them, Skip makes me. I blame it on Skip a lot. But it's really rough. It's hard to tell them, say, hey, I gotta go. Especially the youngest one. She cries a lot.
One of the towns that Cindy passes is Sewickley, Pennsylvania. Much of the history of the river is here. It's stored up in one small 87-year-old man named Fred Way. Many people call him Mr. Ohio River, and they really mean that. Fred Way worked on the river for 54 years, most of it as a boat captain. He has written 8 books about his experiences, and there may be more to come. Fred is also editor of a quarterly magazine, the S&D Reflector, that is published in Marietta, Ohio. He decided very early in life that he wanted to be a river pilot.
That was the best job on the river, was then and still is. I mean, the pay is higher, and it attracted a better class of people, really, the pilots.
Fred's life has involved so many years, so many boats, so many stories. Like the one about the Senator Cordill. It was steaming upriver in the middle of the night. It hit a lock and sank. Fred was asleep at the time. He was off watch, and he got off the boat before it went down. This is the Betsy Ann. He piloted her for 7 years. She was built in 1899. Fred loved her because her hull was made of steel. And this is the Delta Queen, an old paddle wheeler that's still on the river. She's quite a story. A friend of his bought it, but the Delta Queen was in San Francisco at the time. Fred was asleep when he got the call to bring it back.
Well, after I'd committed myself, wife and I were sitting there. We were pretty wide awake by this time. We got out an atlas, and then's when I got the first real shock to discover how much blue there was between San Francisco and the Panama Canal. Oh, brother, what did we got ourselves into? But it all worked out and brought her around. It took about 27 days. We'd figured 30. But you got a tailwind coming up through the Gulf of Mexico, and you got in about 3 days ahead of time. I wouldn't do it again for $1 million.
Among his treasures, Fred has recordings of some old steamboat whistles. He says he can recognize them as easily as he would someone's voice.
What boat was this one on?
Gordon C. Green.
The carriage of the man is that of a small, old, frail man. But I tend to believe that there's more robust and energy in that old man than a lot of other people his age. He just wants to go out and teach and tell people about the river.
Everybody knows Fred Way as Mr. Ohio River, and he's been on the river all of his life. A lot of tradition and just the real American. You know, it's a real American story.
Some people look back on their lives and think of things they might have done differently. Not Fred.
I don't think I'd change a thing, because I've enjoyed every day. I don't think I ever worked a day in my life. It's always fun to get up in the morning and do what there is to do. And a lucky person that can say that.
The history of the Ohio River Valley is tied to the Industrial Revolution. The coal was here in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. So the iron ore was transported here from as far away as Minnesota. And the coal and iron ore combined with water formed the steel industry. To move the ore in and the steel out, there were new railroads, bridges, roads, and a modernized waterway system. But as the natural resources dwindled, new technology was needed, and pollution had to be diminished and controlled. One symbol of this change is the atomic power plant at Shippingport, Pennsylvania. It is the first atomic electric plant devoted exclusively to civilian needs. To many, it represents progress in a technological society. But it is the kind of progress that stirs emotional debate about what people want and what the consequences may be. One cost of progress is clearly visible in the streets of Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. This used to be a thriving, tough-minded steel town. But the old-fashioned way that Aliquippa made steel became outdated. Imported steel was cheaper. Newer plants located elsewhere could turn out customized products. In 1957, nearly 15,000 people worked at the mill in Aliquippa. In 1985, the making of raw steel had totally stopped.
It was very staggering to see a town that at one point was a booming town. The economy was just coming along fine. Everybody had a job. They were working one day, and the very next day they weren't working. And if you can imagine what that would do to someone who throughout their entire life had always been under the impression that their job was sacred and they were going to be doing it in the steel industry, would be continuing and would never stop.
Around the bend of the river in Steubenville, Ohio, the story is much the same. Another blue-collar town with a lot of blue-collar people out of work. This was a common problem in the Ohio Valley. Old steel mills becoming obsolete, the coal industry being choked by the new clean air standards. As for the quality of water in the river, well, despite some setbacks, the overall effort to keep the Ohio clean is making progress.
How's the water, Mark? There's Corrado. Woo!
On a scorching summer day, Bill and Mark welcomed a chance to test these waters. Wheeling Island sits in the middle of the Ohio River between West Virginia and Ohio. It's the most populated island in the interior United States. About 5,000 people live here. They get to and from Wheeling over bridges. The crew of the Driftwood became curious about who built them. They found Carl Chaddock. For most of his life, he has been working on the bridges that span the Ohio from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati. He is proud of that.
Over my career as an iron worker, I've probably worked on more than 100 bridges, maintenance-wise, and of course it's taxing my memory, but I do believe I've probably worked on, erected from scratch, in the neighborhood of 25 bridges. And I can run around the country and have a little pride in seeing my work wherever I go. They get older, and so do I.
This is Carl's favorite, the Wheeling Suspension Bridge. It was originally built in 1849, the first one to cross the Ohio River. It has taken a lot of beatings from weather and traffic. As a young man, Carl worked on one of its renovations, and it's still the pride of Wheeling.
It's my pet because this is where I started to work and when I was a young fellow and a child, less to say, and I've lived with it and I've watched it be repaired. It's only been closed 4 times that I know of since its beginning. I hope you will see it lit up. We're so proud of it, and well, like I say, it's my baby.
Carl has lived in this house on Wheeling Island almost all his life. He's typical American working class, ex-Marine, respect for traditional values and strong family ties. His 3 daughters have all stayed in the area, and he has welcomed several foreign exchange students to his home. He loves his island, come hell or high water.
Another story that Carl was talking about is when the flood does happen, how the whole community, they're really close, tight-knit, and they help each other out. You know, these people are really closely knit, and it seems like the river is the cause of it.
Surviving floods is sort of a national sport around here. They still talk about the big one of 1936 when the water rose more than 54 feet and into the 2nd floor of many buildings. Carl was just a little boy then. His big one was 1972 when the river totally filled his basement. But despite the floods and the depressed economy in the Ohio River Valley, Carl is a very positive, happy man.
It's been very good to me. The Lord's been good to me with my health, and the people that I work with are just wonderful people. We live hard, we work hard, and we enjoy what we do. We have a lot of pride in our work.
The Ohio River runs southwest from Wheeling down to Huntington, West Virginia, population 64,000. Once a major hub for transporting coal westward, now home of an impressive art museum. This is where Bill and Mark met a young woman named Beth Hager, who was curator of history for the museum. She made a sincere and commendable career choice.
I went to school at West Virginia University and then to graduate school at the University of Delaware. And I came back because I heard that there was a major history project, Ohio River Odyssey, coming about, and I thought I could lend help.
This is it, the Ohio River Odyssey exhibit. 3 years of work for Beth. It's set up as an historic voyage down the river.
The Ohio River was very important in settling the West. People would get to the river by way of the National Road or through the mountains, and would travel on down flatboats. Some families even broke up their flatboats when they got to their destination and made their houses with it. Then later, of course, the river was important in establishing the Ohio Valley as a great commercial center, the great steamboat era.
One of Beth's key resources in assembling this exhibit was Fred Way. He gave her use of his library and helped her find people who would lend her artifacts and materials. If Fred Way is Mr. Ohio River, what does that make Beth?
I doubt if I'm Miss Ohio River, but I'd like to be.
Perhaps she expresses that feeling best when she is singing with Renaissance, a small vocal group that performs in the area.
And they came on board and just sang magnificent. It was beautiful. I just wanted to sit down and enjoy them singing as we were traveling along the Ohio River. It was really nice.
The beautiful Ohio flows on from Huntington, West Virginia toward Cincinnati. It's near there that they found Art and Jenny Wiseman. Their passion is birds, watching them, studying them, and preserving the environment for them.
I wonder where that song sparrow is. That one.
They spend a lot of their time in a large wetland area called the Oxbow. It serves as a stopover for birds migrating north in the spring and south in the fall. They need a safe place to rest and feed for a few days. When there was talk of dredging the Oxbow and turning it into a place to park and unload barges, Art and Jenny stepped in. They helped form a non-profit group that strives to preserve this area. They get money through donations. Art is the treasurer, and so far, they've managed to buy 26 acres of the Oxbow.
Yep. I can remember when Jenny and I first started bird watching, we would come here, and it would not be unusual to see 5,000 or 10,000 ducks. One year was particularly productive, and there must have been in the neighborhood of 25,000 ducks and water birds around here. My wife loves to get her feet muddy no matter where she goes. Just loves.
After walking through the Oxbow with the Wisemans, Mark Hollensteiner got the message.
And it seems like all through our shooting, there's not the birds that used to be. And we were even talking to the Wisemans, and they're saying all these birds are dying each year, and these species are going out in extinction, each year.
How do people get involved in a crusade like this? For Art and Jenny, it just came naturally. After they retired, Jenny's mother asked Art to put up a bird feeder. Soon they put up some more. They volunteered to do some bird taxidermy for the Cincinnati Museum of Natural History. Then came the threat of losing their favorite place to watch birds, the Oxbow.
If the wetlands go away, there's never going to be a replacement for them.
Art and Jenny say they would never keep a caged bird. But Spook, their little owl, is part of the family. Spook was hit by a car and can't fly, but she moves around pretty well.
She hops. She takes off thinking she can fly, and she hits her crash pads and then waddles out to the other room. She has little perches that she can jump from pillar to post and get where she wants to go.
Spook is well fed. She always has a supply of frozen mice. Art calls them mousicles. He says the owl eats more during the migrating season. Her little song tells him that.
She sings a little song which goes something like, she does it in line with her migration. When other birds are migrating, she's jumping around like crazy at night. So we think she's migrating, and that makes her happy, so we're happy.
Down past the Oxbow Bend, the Ohio River flows with Kentucky on one side and Indiana on the other. On this stretch of the river, the farmland comes right down to the banks. It's corn and livestock country. The crew made arrangements to visit one of the farms there. The driftwood anchored offshore near Patriot, Indiana. Bill and Mark took the small tender to the riverbank. They were greeted by Leroy Brammer, professional pig farmer, with an emphasis on professional.
Leroy, good to see you again.
Leroy and his wife Deanna have operated this farm for more than 20 years. They raise almost all of the feed for their livestock. They are experts at raising hogs for market.
Oh, we're, I guess, biased, you might say. We think we're the best. We've won a number of awards for this farm, and the first thing we tell people that come in to visit us, if you see anything that will help us, tell us. I mean, we're not the know-it-all. We want to learn.
There is a demand for good pork, and the Brammers are meeting that demand by using the best methods they can find. That means clean, scientific barns that take a hog from 90 pounds to 230 pounds, 3 pounds of feed to 1 pound of weight gain. Everything here is done for a reason. For instance, ears are notched to indicate the date the pig was born and who his mommy was. This is not a hog rolling in the mud operation. This is lean, tender pork on the hoof. In order to get this on tape, Bill and Mark had to take a shower and change clothes. After getting over the initial surprise of having to clean up to visit pigs, Bill got a real understanding of the way Leroy works.
We proceeded to go on in through each stage. And throughout that, we were talking with Leroy. Also, his manager was Rick, very well informed, very, when it comes to hog farm, very intelligent man.
Heat lamp here that give the baby pigs more heat because when they're first born.
I was really under the impression that both of them were very, very proud of what they have done there and what they're producing.
This Brammer farm turns out 7,600 hogs per year. Almost all of them go to Cincinnati, once known as Porkopolis. Leroy's wife, Deanna, who keeps the books on the farm, knows the story.
I've heard that many years ago that it was a big pork industry in Cincinnati, the slaughterhouses and all, and that they, to get the hogs to market, they drove them through the streets of Cincinnati rather than truck them like we do now.
Leroy drives his hogs about 50 miles up to Kahn's meat packing plant in Cincinnati. For Mark and Bill, it was watching hogs go in one place and hot dogs come out the other.
Boom, they come down the rack and they go through the whole process from where they're taking them off the racks where they're wrapped and being boxed. And boom, you hold it up and here's Kahn's, the wiener the world awaited. Right there in your hand.
And here's where the wiener the world awaited ends up.
Tastes like the best Kahn's met I've ever had in my life.
The people of Cincinnati enjoy their hot dogs, and they don't mind proclaiming that the pig is a big deal around here. But there's more to Cincinnati than the consumption of hot dogs. This is a real Ohio River metropolis, the largest city between Pittsburgh and the Mississippi. Cincinnati celebrated its bicentennial in 1988. When they built a new facility here for the baseball Reds and the football Bengals, they gave it an appropriate name, Riverfront Stadium. This is a remarkably active port. 16 million tons are shipped through Cincinnati annually. The riverfront down at Yankee Landing near Warsaw, Kentucky has a different look. It's not beautiful like Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, but it's the way the owner, John Beatty, likes it. This is the headquarters for Beatty's Navy. Captain Beatty is in the salvaging business or anything else involving boats in the river.
Carpenter something to do, and I've got to start to take that.
He cleaned all this mess up once and made it look so orderly that they raised his taxes. So he immediately went back to the junk motif. John Beatty is a self-made millionaire. People pay him large sums of money to do impossible jobs. He has salvaged more than 1,500 wrecks. Right now, his big project is restoring an old paddle wheeler, the last of its kind. He lives in a well-appointed house with his wife, Clara, and yes, those windows are portholes. This man embodies the term rugged individual.
I didn't get out of the first year of high school. I had too many other things to do. When we moved to Cincinnati, I went to a high school here, and they had a pretty ornery superintendent there. And he said, we don't want you in this school. Your grades aren't good enough. And I said, well, that's all right with me. I don't want to come to the damn place anyway. So with that, I went down and went to the electrical trade school in Cincinnati. They called that the bad boy school.
That bad boy image is still alive. A few years ago, he had a run-in with the Coast Guard. His version is that they interfered with his salvage work by stopping and boarding his boat without cause.
And I told him to go to hell and get the hell off my boat before he got hurt. It's exactly what I told him. And I'd do it again tomorrow.
But Captain John is not at odds with all national authority figures. The FBI likes him. They pay him to reclaim evidence from the river. He has a huge underwater magnet that will bring up almost anything, like discarded guns.
And I found a few of them for him. In the last year, I've been to Florida. I got one the first 3 minutes I was there. And, oh, I got one out of the Licking River for them here a few years back. And I got I believe it was an adding machine and a typewriter and 2 electric irons and a gun, all in the first bite.
Captain Beatty still spends about 200 days a year on the river. He's in his mid-70s, he wears 2 hearing aids, and he can be a bit crusty.
That's the most horrible word in the English language, is rotten. It's just a little bit doty, it's not rotten.
But he has some incredible memories, like the time back around 1925 when he saw the whale.
Oh, the whale.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I seen that whale twice in my life. And they had a whale on a flat car, and it had been embalmed. There's no question about it. And boy, did it stink. But they had its mouth propped open, and they had a platform in there. And the town band from up here at Patriot, just 15 miles from here, showed up in Aurora, and they all got in there, and they played their band music inside the whale's mouth. Now, I witnessed this. I seen it. I heard it.
In a recent newspaper interview with a Cleveland plain dealer, John summed up his feelings about the Ohio River. His words are worth repeating. He said, "That's my damn river out there, and I haven't done it a bit of harm. The Ohio River is like a beautiful woman. There's no humiliation from which she can't recover if she's allowed to come back in her slow, sweet way." At Westward River Mile 584, we find one of Kentucky's most glamorous trademarks, the horse farm. The owner here is one Dinwiddie Lampton, country gentleman and squire of the 300-acre Hardscuffle estate.
They'll be coaching.
Perhaps some of these names need a bit of explaining.
Well, the Dinwiddies came from Dumfries, Scotland, and the Lamptons came from England.
Dinwiddie named the farm Hardscuffle because when he came here 30 years ago, he says it was a hard scuffle to stay.
Walk on.
A successful insurance business allows him to pursue some unusual interests, like steeplechase racing. Actually, Mr. Lampton is doing two things here, entertaining his guests from the driftwood and checking out the race courses.
This is the first turn on the course off to the right here. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Come on, boy, go swimming, Travis. Go take a good swim, Trav. Go on. Boy, that's good. That's good, good, good. Oh, that's so good. Aren't you glad you're alive?
Dinwiddie is extraordinarily proud of his horses.
Well, the Canadian crossbreds, they came from 200 miles north of Toronto, and they provided more pleasure to me than any horses I've ever had. Whether I've had a leg over them or behind them driving them, these have been most useful animals, and I'm most devoted to them. Heather's a good girl. She wears her hair in the washerwoman fashion, you see. It's kind of mussed, and it's a little disheveled, but she doesn't care. She thinks it's stylish. Yes, anything for style. Yeah.
Next, Dinwiddie took the group to his lying place. You have to step over an imaginary fence to get there.
The imaginary fence is there. Once in the lying place, the truth is never uttered. Every utterance is a lie, bold as possible, but undiluted a lie. You might not believe it. 10 minutes in the lying place, and I can be relatively honest for a 24-hour period.
This is all pure Dinwiddie Lampton. In nearby Louisville, he takes care of business. This is where he runs his insurance company, which gives him the income to pursue his interest in horses and racing.
Well, I find that living is not unlike a fine meal. I mean, you don't want all soup, and you don't want all dessert, and certainly nothing other than the meat course would be dull. So if a good meal is well balanced, so life should be.
Then there was the bluegrass that didn't look at all blue. He explained that it was too early in the summer. It gets blue later. And maybe that blue is in the eye of the beholder.
We Kentuckians are prejudiced in favor of bluegrass. And perhaps it takes a little bit more poetry than many people have to appreciate the quality of the blue in the bluegrass. But if you're without poetry in one area, doubtless you'd be deprived of it in others, too.
Now, 2 days later, what everyone has been waiting for. Dinwiddie's triumph, the Bola Hard Scuffle Steeplechase. He has been hosting this spectacle for 14 years. It's a day of sport, a day to recall the tradition of the Old South, and a day to raise money. The beneficiary in all this is the Kentucky Opera. What we're seeing is a fundraiser with style. Many of the patrons make the 20-mile trip upriver from Louisville on an historic sternwheeler. Some of the dress is circa 1900. And of course, Dinwiddie is the ringmaster. But the real attraction is the racing. Horses and riders from all over the country assembled here to compete in the 6 steeplechase races scheduled for the day.
Battling it out to the lead as they come to the 10th fence. And now here's the showing comes worth your while in third place.
This gala day at Hardscuffle attracts a crowd of 12,000 spectators. Combined with a fashion show and a grand ball, this event has raised more than $1 million for the Kentucky Opera over the past 14 years.
Avalanche Cannon has the lead as they double cross the lead. 2030 into second place and moving very strongly now to challenge 2030 is worth your while as they come to the wire. It's Avalanche Cannon and 2030 and worth your while.
For For Dinwiddie Lambden, this is all part of a life he has chosen, being in Kentucky on the banks of the Ohio River. What does that mean to him?
Well, it means that the Almighty has smiled on me forever. That says it all, I believe.
This was the end of Mark Hollensteiner's month on the Driftwood. He was going to return to Ohio University for his graduation and then look for a job in broadcasting, perhaps as a cameraman.
The feeling that I'm leaving the Driftwood is that I don't want to leave. I'd like to stay here a little bit longer. It's a whole different kind of life because we live on the boat, and during the day we were doing stories, and we're really caught up into what we're doing. You know, we don't go home and watch TV and think about bills or anything like that. We go back on the boat and think about tomorrow and talk about what we learned the day of the shooting, you know, what we've done, and I'm gonna really miss that.
The new intern was Julie Wright, a graduate video student at the University of Southern California with a strong interest in anthropology. She came aboard in Kentucky, where she had been visiting some relatives. Julie's first story was a bit unusual. It involved barbecued mutton, something that goes over very well in Owensboro, Kentucky. This is the Moonlight Barbecue. It's operated by the Bosley family. Hugh and Catherine Bosley bought this place in 1963. It was just a little diner then with a few tables. But with the help of their 4 children, the Bosleys have continued to enlarge their restaurant. Now they serve approximately 1,000 people a day. The big attraction is the barbecued mutton, and apparently it's an acquired taste. The daytime manager is Ken Bosley, one of the sons.
Well, as far as we've been able to research, barbecued mutton is kind of a specialty to this area, and about, I'd say a 50-mile radius. Paducah's 100 miles west of us, and people think you're nuts if you go in there and ask for barbecued mutton. It's strictly pork.
The mutton is cooked for 12 hours over a hickory fire. Then Father Hugh's original sauce is added. But what makes it so special?
Can't tell. Just from hard work and checking and knowing what to do. I can taste it and tell.
Well, I'm not real fond of mutton, but the mutton was delicious. It really was good. It just was incredibly filling. So you just eat a little bit and you're full for at least a couple days.
That's Moonlight Barbecue. Moonlight Barbecue, 2708 Parish Avenue, Owensboro.
When the Driftwood reached Cave-In Rock, Illinois, it was only 98 miles from the point where the Ohio meets the Mississippi. And for some early pioneers traveling west on the Ohio, it was a brutal, tragic end of their journey. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, pirates would hide in this limestone cave. As the boats would come downriver, the pirates would stop them, steal whatever they wanted, and often murder the passengers. It's a peaceful place now, and as things turned out, Bill and Julie came at a good time. It was the day before the annual River Festival, and there were replicas of old flatboats in the water.
They used to just take the flatboats down the river, and when it was time, they'd be carrying potatoes or some kind of goods. When it came time to come in and sell them at the market, they would just take the boat apart and sell the wood. And then they would either walk back or travel by horse and carriage back to their home.
The dramatic climax of this driftwood voyage was supposed to be the confluence where the Ohio River meets the Mississippi near Cairo, Illinois. 2 storied, majestic waterways coming together. But when the driftwood went through, it was a summer of drought, the lowest water levels in 100 years, and there were masses of silt and sand where the water normally flows. Hundreds of barges were backed up for several days because there wasn't enough river to carry them on.
We've been here 4 days, waiting our turn to pass through that area southbound eventually on our way to New Orleans.
What's going to happen to this boat?
We're wrong.
You have to take.
We're going to be getting laid off, probably.
Seriously?
Seriously.
It's the lowest I ever seen it in 18. I've been out here 18 years, and this is the lowest I ever seen it in 18 years.
Which is going to get worse.
What do you do then?
Draw unemployment, get fat and sassy. Lay home with mama. Well, you want the truth?
Go to car races every Friday night.
But through it all, the river people seem to have a resiliency that gets them through the rough times. This was not lost on Bill and Julie.
Comparing to a lot of the other travels that the Driftwood has done, the people that we've met along the Ohio River are deep-rooted. They're not big town people. They're friendly people. They're tough people, strong-willed, intelligent, smart. They really are. And it's the Ohio River, I think, reflecting on their personalities and character.
The people along the river have their own particular, what we anthropologists call ethos, which is kind of a characteristic spirit. And there's a real distinctive spirit among the people who live along the Ohio River. And kind of good old country boy kind of thing. It's just been really a wonderful experience meeting a huge variety of people along the water.
In fact, this marks the end of the Driftwood's Ohio River Odyssey. It should be added, however, that there are many people between here and Pittsburgh who believe that their river, the Ohio, takes a bend southward here and flows all the way to New Orleans. They figure that all those maps that say Mississippi just have it marked wrong. In the weeks ahead, join the crew of the Driftwood as they travel more than 25,000 miles and rediscover the stories along the waterways that link the people of North America with one another and the rest of the world. Come along as they explore man's relationship with the water he treasures and despoils, plays with and fights with, and cannot live without. Join these young people on the next leg of On the Waterways.
Funding for this program was provided